250 miles above us on the International Space Station, astronauts are using a piece of technology about the size of a mini fridge to help fabricate and replace missing tools and parts for the space station. Luckily, here at the Metal Museum, we don't have to go that far up into the atmosphere to access the same technology. Hidden away at the museum, away from all of our artwork, in the downstairs part of the library is our very own 3D printer. Though our 3D printer and the printer used on the International Space Station are two different types of printers, the concept here is still the same. Both NASA and the museum are using our printers to create objects that would normally take an entirely different set of tools to make, and we're doing that quickly and efficiently. While astronauts on the International Space Station are printing off replacement tools, like this wrench seen here being held by astronaut Butch Wilmore, the Metal Museum uses our 3D printer to aid in the sculpting process of our projects and commissions. These 3D prints can be used in the smithy as references when forging work, or they can be used to make molds in the foundry for casting work, which is exactly what we're going to do today. To help with this project is our Foundry Manager, James Vanderpool, and together we're going to show you how we created this amazing casting of the Gale crater on Mars. The first thing that James and I did was visited NASA's database for 3D models. So we found this 3D model of the Gale crater that was made by collected data from NASA and the European Space Agency. After downloading the 3D model, James used our program to scale down that size of the model to fit our 3D printer. Now, if you can imagine, the real Gale crater is almost 100 miles wide, and we shrunk it down to about 4 by 6 inches. After our model was scaled down to the 3D printer, we sent it over to the printer and let it do its work, and this took around 18 hours to print. Inside our 3D printer are 2 lasers and a pool of resin. Those lasers crisscross to cure that resin in layers and layers and layers to create our 3D print. After about 18 hours, James removes our print and puts it into a different machine that cleans off any of the residue that's left after printing. After that machine cleans off all the residue left over from the printing process, James removes all the extra resin that we don't need for the casting. Then he puts it into one last machine that cures the resin using UV light. After the resin is cured, our 3D print is done, and we can take it over to the foundry and get to work on casting it in aluminum.
Okay, now that we've finished our 3D print and have cleaned it up a little bit, we're now ready to take a mold of our pattern. So anytime I refer to our 3D print of Mars, I'm going to be calling it our pattern today. There's a couple of terms I'm going to be using, such as pattern. Also, I'll be using the term flask, which is this metal box here. And I might be using words like gate, rammer, sprue, or cup cutter, just so y'all are aware. And so now what we've done to our pattern is we've taken it to the sander, cleaned up any edges, and we've also beveled all of our sides. When we printed this off, everything was at 90 degrees. But we want our pattern to have a little bit of a draft to it. So drafting is kind of like an ice cube tray, how things taper when they go down. So once your water freezes, you can pop that ice out. We're looking for the same thing here. We want to be able to pack sand around this object. And then once we have sand packed around the object, we want to be able to cleanly remove it without disturbing our sand and without having to break our pattern. So we'll get started. And to get started, I'm going to set my pattern down onto this board. And I'm going to put this little wooden chip right next to it. That's known as a gate, and you'll see why that's there here in a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is surround both the gate and the pattern with one side of my metal box. Again, that's called my flask. So we surround that, and then we're going to put a little bit of a release agent on our pattern and gate. That parting agent is a powder. We use it the same way that you might put flour down on a counter to keep your dough from sticking. This will help the sand not stick to anything on the inside. Now that we have everything powdered up, we're going to take our molding sand and fill the inside of our flask with it. Our molding sand is called green sand. That's this stuff right here. And it's a mixture of sand, clay, and oil. Every single grain of sand is coated with clay, coated with oil, so that when we apply pressure to it, wants to hold its shape very nicely and stick together. So the first little bit of sand I put into my flask is going to go through this screen. And it's going to help to aerate the sand and make it nice and fluffy. And we're going to put enough sand in through our screen just to where we can't see our pattern anymore. So we want to cover our whole first layer. This screen also helps to catch any little bits of metal that might be in my sand. So now that we've got our first layer covered, I'm just going to press that sand down a little bit, just to let it kind of tighten up around that pattern and around that gate, so hopefully nothing moves very much on me. And now we're just going to go ahead and toss sand in all the way to the top. Now that we're at the top of our flask, I'm just going to press down one more time with my hand to make sure that I take out a little bit of the air that's in between all these sand grains. But in order to get a nice mold, we really need to pack that sand down. So I'm going to use a hand rammer. It's got a tapered end and a broad end on it. And I'm going to take the tapered end, and I'm going to go around all my edges to do a task called keying in my sides. And it's just shoving this material, this green sand, up against the edge of my flask, so I'll be able to pick this mold up, flip it over, turn it around, and that sand will want to stay put. Now I'm going to take the broad end of my rammer and go around throughout the whole mold, packing. I'm going to go once on a medium pressure, once on a hard pressure. The only difference is going to be how high I'm raising my rammer. I'm going to fill sand one more time all the way to the top, so I have a nice flat side of my mold. Now I've got a nice piece of steel here. We call it angle iron, that I'm going to use to pack the very top side of my mold. And I'm going to use the flat portion to pack the sand down, and I've sanded a little bit of a sharp edge in one side that I'm going to use to cut the sand off flat. Now that I've got a nice flat side on my mold, it's time for me to flip my mold over. And we'll flip our mold over. And tuck our board right back underneath. You can see we've got our pattern halfway embedded in sand. I'm going to make sure that no sand crept underneath the edge of my flask or underneath my pattern. To do that, I've just got a little hand tool here that I'll use to cut away any sand that crept underneath. Alright, so now that we've cut away any sand that crept underneath, we'll go ahead and put a second flask side on our mold. This will be our top half. It's going to be really important that I remember exactly where this little wooden chip is, because here in a minute I'm going to have to hit it without being able to see it. Just like before, we're going to powder our mold up so our two halves don't stick together. And just like before, the first bit of sand that we put into our mold, we're going to push through this screen. Now that we can't see our pattern anymore, we'll go ahead and press it down and fill our mold all the way to the top. Just like before, we're going to pack our mold using our hand rammer, go around and key our sides, and pack throughout the whole mold. And just like before, we're going to fill it up one last time to make a nice flat side for our top. But now we need to think about how we're going to get metal into that inner cavity. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve a vertical channel that goes from the outside of the mold all the way to the middle point. And what I'm trying to do is hit that little wooden piece that's inside my mold so that I have a vertical channel That's going to take the metal down to the center of the mold. And then that little wooden piece is going to be a channel to take the metal over to where our 3D print is. So I've got a sprue cutter here. It's very thin walled and it tapers as it goes down. So when I press down and feel that little wooden piece, all I have to do is twist. The plug comes out. Now, I'm going to make a nice target for myself to aim at when I pour the metal. So I'm going to cut a pour cup in the top. It's just a nice funnel shape. Now we want to make sure that there's no little crumbly bits of sand around the pour cup. So to take those away, I'm just going to take another tool to press in and kind of polish that sand. Make it nice and smooth so that there's no crumbly bits. Now we're going to be able to open our mold. So I'm going to release these catches. Now we'll tap on the 4 corners. Pull up. You can see the hole we have right to the edge of our wooden piece. So that metal is going to go right to the center where that wooden piece is. Now I have to remove the wooden piece as well as the 3D print. So we have cavities for the metal to fill, to move over and then create a copy of our Mars terrain. So we just tap on all of the pieces in our mold a little bit just to wiggle them and get them all loose. Let's see if we can flip them out. So I'm going to take this mold right over to my sand bucket and try and flip these pieces out. So there we have the negative of our Mars terrain, as well as where that wooden piece was. Now you can see there's a little bit of a dam in between where our gate was and where our pattern was. So I'm just going to carve that little piece of sand away. Now I'll do the same thing on the top part of our mold. And now we're ready to put our mold back together and melt our metal. Now that we've finished our mold, we're over here at the furnace in the foundry, and we've got several different tools we're going to use to pour our aluminum into our mold. The metal we're going to be pouring today is aluminum. Aluminum is a lower melting metal. It melts at about 1200 degrees, but we're going to be trying to get it up to about 1400 degrees, so 4 times hotter than your average oven gets. Inside of my furnace, I've got a ceramic cup called a crucible that I'm going to put the aluminum into. When I heat up the furnace, my aluminum will liquefy when it's at temperature, and once it's ready, I'll transfer my crucible from the furnace to this metal shank here. It fits right into this metal ring. That way I can pick the crucible up, take it over to our mold and pour. When I do all this, it's really important that I'll be wearing safety glasses, natural fiber clothing, leather shoes, as well as full foundry gear. So I'll have on a leather coat, leather gloves, and on top of my safety glasses, a full face shield. Now we're gonna cool it off. We'll cut off any bit of the plumbing like this gate. And then when we come back, we'll show you it cleaned up and a little bit of color put to it.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope that you learned so much about 3D printing in both space and here at the Metal Museum.
And a special shout out to NASA for providing us with the 3D imagery of the Gale crater from Mars.